Ko Te Ora Flavel.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, kia ora tātou katoa. I te tuatahi hei wāhi te ahu tango taku kōrero. E hāngai tonu taku kōrero ki te minita, kia Simon Power. Koea tēnei kā riro i tana tūranga i te rānei. Ko tāku, ko te mihi ki aia. Nā rungi te ahu tango tana kōrero ka puta a kua kenei me te mihi ki aia. Mo te mahi tahi, me te aoro mai o ana taringa ki ngā kōrero o te Pāti Māori. Noe re kone te mihi ki aia me te tumana kuia, ka riro mā te wāhi ngaro ia e manaki e tiaki. Taia tiki ngā mema ka puta i te whare pārema tā pōpō, ka nui te mihi ki a kūta katoa, me ki haere, e hoki ki te wā kāinga, ki a rongo kūtau, i te mahana o te whānau, ka mutu ki a mōhio anoho ki ko ea te wāhi ki a kūta. No reira i te minita, tēnā koe, ka nui te mihi ki a koe mahi tahi nei me mātou, ka mutu mā te wāhi ngaro koe manaki. Mr. Speaker, just to acknowledge the Minister, Simon Power, wish him well, as I said in Māori, and his move on into other things, and also to the other speakers this afternoon, but I just pay tribute to Simon Power for the work he's done with the Māori Party and being able to work not only at the Business Committee, I might add, but also in pieces of legislation that have been pretty important to us. So I wish him well. I just want to take a brief call, Mr. Speaker, to have a look at this piece of legislation which to validate and which basically validates and confirms acts which might otherwise become obsolete. The purpose of the bill is to prevent, as others have said, the expiry of certain subordinate legislation that lapses at a stated time unless earlier confirmed or validated by Act of Parliament. Again, others have said that the bill contains 13 items of subordinate legislation that would otherwise lapse unless they're validated and or confirmed. And they've also given time to the detail of the bill, talking about the intricacies of the Customs and Excise Act, the Superannuation and Retirement Income Act, and the War Pension Acts, perhaps even, or the Wine Act, so I'm told it's called. Mr. Speaker, my small and humble contribution is really to step back a little bit and question the power vested in Parliament to revisit legislation, which is pretty an important issue, actually, will be an issue tomorrow. The ability of Parliament to confirm, to validate or otherwise authorise acts in a retrospective basis, indeed to make the unlawful lawful. So the classic recent case of this was the Appropriation Parliamentary Expenditure Validation Bill, which was moved through Parliament under urgency in October 2006. For those who have forgotten this shady past, following the 2005 election, there was widespread debate about the dubious practice by political parties in breaching election or parliamentary spending rules in some respect. And so, sir, legislation was introduced to validate the invalid, to rectify the expenditure which the Auditor General had concluded went beyond the appropriations and was deemed unlawful. So, the legislation to confirm or to validate, to redress unlawful practice is not just a contemporary thing. I was fortunate to get some information about another bill, so the history of this sort of has some whakapapa to it, dating back to a bill called the Indemnity Act of 1860, which, for those of you who didn't know, basically rendered military officers and others immune from prosecution for anything done by them while they were acting under the authority of the proclamation of martial law back in the 1860s. So basically, the government of the day passed the Indemnity Act to prevent itself from being taken to court for its illegal actions in Taranaki in around the 1860s, where my wife and my in-laws come from. The tragic story of this bill can be traced through the Hansard of the 29th of October 1860, sir, and describes the events surrounding the storming of Parihaka on the 25th of January 1860 against the people of Taranaki gathered there in a state of peace. I want to particularly refer members to the Hansard record of the Honourable Mr. Swanson, who described in full the establishment of martial law in Taranaki and provided the House with this pretty eloquent conclusion. He says, "But acts of indemnity cannot bury our actions in oblivion, nor can they shield us from the judgment of posterity. It is hard to say, indeed, whether to Great Britain victory or defeat would be the more painful humiliation. Either result would certainly be followed by a bitterness of feeling between the two races, which in all probability would ever be effaced. and which would too probably end in the extermination or oppression of the Māori people. A lamentable and humiliating fulfilment of the proud professions with which the colonisation in New Zealand was commenced. That's what he had to say. So, Mr. Speaker, one always hopes that we learn from our experience, that our history informs our present. In this subordinate legislation, the Confirmation and Validation Bill, our focus is mainly on timeliness, on ensuring that we are keeping up with the timeframes established on the 13 various pieces of legislation that would otherwise lapse or fall into oblivion. So my point in taking us back to 2006 and even further to 1860 was to simply encourage us to all think about the power of the executive and how we make the best use of the parliamentary authority vested in us as members of Parliament. It's really a question that will no doubt rise again, as I said, tomorrow, when urgency is once again called upon to basically make the unlawful lawful, and we'll see what rolls out tomorrow. Pune tāku kia tātou, kia ora tātou.
Dr. Rajim Prasad.